Welcome back to the Shift to Freedom podcast. I'm your host, Ben Easter, and I'm here today with Gerta Malai. And I'm very excited to have a conversation with her because she's a world-class negotiator, really expert at negotiations. And I'm super excited to kind of dig in because I think negotiations are so important for the principles of freedom and how we can open up more possibilities in the world. Because every time you interact with other human beings, it's an opportunity for negotiations. So really excited to have you, Gerta. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, great. So, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about how you got into this? What are you what's your business, and how did it come to be in the first place? What are you up to over there?
Yeah, I'm the founder and CEO of yournegotiations.com. I basically teach negotiations to job seekers, founders, companies, and help them maximize the value for the things they care about. Whether that's helping people negotiate their job offers or startup founders negotiate with their investors, their potential co-founders, or even larger businesses negotiate their contracts with customers or vendors. So that's what I do. And how I got there, it's actually from different ways. So I actually come from Albania, which is a developing country that has gone through a lot of turbulence over the years, but we're a very hustle culture. So I think it is a bit in my DNA to just be always hustling and trying to get the best deal in things. I also have a passion for behavioral sciences and psychology, and always reading books and listening to podcasts and things like that. And then finally, it's my education. I have been trained in negotiations by MIT experts and Harvard Law School experts. So combining all of those three things, three backgrounds and passions has formed my negotiation philosophy.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that thing that you're talking about where it's in your DNA because you're in a hustle culture. I think one of the things and one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on here is because I think in the American culture, that's not it's not well, we don't typically think of things as being negotiable. Like people, you quote your price, you quote your job, whatever. And the only time I think that negotiations really come into most people's minds is when you're negotiating a job offer or something like that. And very rarely do we think of, you can literally negotiate with
Yeah.
anyone, anytime about whatever the thing is. And so I think just considering the cultural differences that there are other places where it's normal to
Yeah.
negotiate about anything that you get into at all. So I think that's
Right.
really cool. I'm really excited to get into some of this DNA and peel back some of the curtains. So let's start with talking about how to think about negotiations. So I'd love for you to kind of cue us up. And what I'd like, if it's okay with you, what I'd like to do is kind of talk about negotiations from a very general sense, because I know there's job negotiations, salary negotiations, there's equity negotiations, there's sales, which is a kind of negotiation. But what I'd love to do is kind of think about them in very general terms. What would you say are the important things for somebody to know about or to think about before they're entering into any situation where they are negotiating?
Yeah, this is a very important question. So a couple things to think about is there is this misconception that negotiations are combative, and it's a win-lose, a zero-sum game. So that is a very common misconception and something to leave behind and move past it. It's a very common expression in negotiation theory to think about expanding the pies instead of thinking when you're negotiating, we have a pie, I need to get as big of a piece or as big of a chunk of it, and you get as little as possible. You actually want to think about expanding the pie, and so we both get more than if we split it 50-50 or another way. So that's I would say the biggest thing is to think about it more as a collaborative process and very creative process. So again, expanding the pie means thinking outside the box and what can we come up together in ways that we are both happy, or I give you this, what can you give me to make me happy? And it is a lot, definitely a science, the psychology of it, but also an art in how you get creative in that problem solving.
I love that. I love this idea of expanding the pie and getting out of the zero sum mindset. Now we've done a podcast before, Clayton and I, on the zero sum mindset and kind of getting out of this finite
Mhm.
game thinking.
Yeah.
Where in order to win, somebody else has to lose, right? And so I'd love to hear, like, can you maybe give us some examples of like might someone think about expanding the pie? Because I think
Yeah.
in a lot of situations, you think, like, for example, a salary negotiation, you think, well, like, if I'm going to get money, you're going to give me that money, and like, so how might I think about expanding the pie in that situation?
Yeah, so in salary negotiations, this is actually pretty easy for me to think about. So basically, there are many things that you as a job applicant care about, and there's many things that the business cares about. And so, yes, there are some pools, for example, money, certain items where, when someone makes more of that piece of that pool, the other makes less. But there are ways in which you can have a win-win. So, for example, maybe you as the applicant, you wouldn't mind starting in 2 weeks and between, like, 2 weeks and 2 months, but the company wants you to start as soon as possible. They want you to start within 2 weeks. You were hoping to get a vacation, but you're okay with foregoing that. So that's a position in which you can give them something without losing much on your end. You're like, yeah, I'm happy to start in 2 weeks, but for them it's a huge win. They have to launch a product or some sort of they could have their own reasons why they want to move fast on this. So that's a way in which you're expanding the pie. Your start date wasn't even top of mind for you when you were applying to a job, but now you can give it to them, make them happy. Maybe they throw in another a few thousands of dollars in it to sweeten the deal for you. So that is a beautiful outcome in a negotiation where now it's very collaborative, and you're like, I can start early, and they're like, okay, we'll give you a bit more money, and you're strengthening the relationship instead of it being combative. And I know a lot of people, I have a lot of clients who are applying to new jobs. They're worried about negotiations being combative and harming the relationship with the company, but actually can be you can have very positive outcomes. And I know that your audience is maybe a lot of them are small, like business owners and maybe startup founders. So I wanted to give an example in that as well. So for business owners, again, like let's say you're negotiating a contract with a vendor. So again, what's top of mind for people is the price. So everyone cares about the price, okay, but there could be other things that one party cares about but the other party doesn't. So again, it could be like deliverable date, like, can you actually do it faster? I'm willing to pay you more, or I'm willing to agree on this initial price. Or it could be like reviews, like, you can ask your customer if they can't afford you, like, okay, I'll give you a discount, but can you leave a positive review for me if the experience is positive? So those are ways in which you can expand the pie and be creative.
Awesome. So what I'm hearing you say is basically, like, don't think about the negotiation in terms of one single variable, like in this case,
Hmm.
price or salary or whatever.
Hmm.
Instead, think about it as being a kind of a cluster or a collection of various different chips that you might be able to use
Yeah.
to kind of bargain in this situation, whatever the situation is. Yeah.
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I ask, how do you think about figuring out what those chips are? So, like, if we're going into a negotiation with someone, how do you think about, like, what kind of prep work do we do, or what kinds of conversational techniques do we use in order to find out what chips might be on the table? Because like, somebody might not know that the start date is important for the company, for example. So,
Yeah.
how do you think, and might not even know to ask that question? Obviously, there's limited things that we're asking in that kind of a context, but so how do we think about asking those questions?
Yeah, that I'm so glad you asked this question because I was going to proactively offer to talk about it. So there's two things. One is you being very clear with yourself what your priorities are, and especially what your non-negotiables are. And then two is trying to learn as much about the other side as possible. Of course, you want to do your research, outside of the conversations with them, but also asking questions and seeing what's important to them. Sometimes the other party might be very transparent, but sometimes you can also ask indirect questions about their priorities. In terms of figuring out your own priorities, for job search, I actually have a document I can share with your audience if that's okay. We can put a link or something.
Cool.
Where how to figure out your priorities in a negotiation. So for job seekers, I have things like of course, base salary, you have bonus, sign-on bonus, stock options. But then I put things like title, reputation of the company, how much you like your manager, um, things like do you have direct reports or not, and things like that. So, and you need to sit down and do this exercise for yourself before an important negotiation. You would be surprised what you discover about yourself. I um, many of my clients, when we do this exercise, it feels very obvious at first, but with one client, we've spent an entire hour just going through, oh, actually, I realize I care about title more than pay. That's so interesting. So things like that. So you do an exercise for your own self exploration, knowing your priorities, but you also want to do your research on the other party as well.
Yeah, so what kind of research would you do? Because by the way, I love this because what we're actually talking about is not just negotiations. I mean, this is really useful in any situation, right? Where we're trying to interact with another human being, like where there's like a contract is one way, but actually like figuring out what's important to you in a situation, your values first, and then also then figuring out what is important to the other person. I mean, that's what we're really
Mhm.
talking about here, right?
Yeah.
So how do you think about helping people figure out what's important to the other person in the negotiation?
Yes. So, how do you help people figure out what's important to the other person? So, some of this you can deduce by reading between the lines. So, in job negotiations, maybe the recruiter calls you 5 times a day or they move you along very quickly. That to me signals that they need to fill this role very quickly. And so, it's important for them, like timeline, and they might be a little desperate. You might have a bit more leverage. So, some of it is reading between the lines. The other piece is like, in job negotiations, like doing the research on the company culture. Are they a straight shooter, or are they a very like indirect, like very positive vibes first company? And so you want to tailor your message around what you find out from that research. And then ultimately, it's also okay to ask directly. Indirectly might be best, so you don't want to show your hand, but you can also ask like, um, what is most important to you in this contract? Like, let's say you're a business owner, you're trying to lock down a client or a customer, and you can simply ask like, do you is what's giving you pause? Is it the price, or is it the timeline, the deadline of my deliverables? You can just ask and be direct, and you'd be surprised. Sometimes people will just tell you, and then you can work from there.
Yeah, I love that. And there's like a mindset I think that goes into this, which we started with, but really like imagining that there is a win-win situation for us to figure out.
Yeah.
And like for me, one of the ethics of this, I think, is I only accept win-win situations. Like I won't win at
Yeah.
somebody else's expense. And I think that that is like just putting myself in that mindset before I enter into a negotiation, I think is a really, really useful principle. Is just like I'm gonna like take a stand for a win-win situation. I'm either going to find something where it's going to work really well and I call it a fuck yes. You know, we're either going to get to a fuck yes point or we're not going to have an agreement. And either of those is totally fine. And I just want to make sure that we're on the same page about that. So I love this way of thinking of like, it's okay to just ask like, how can I help you to make
Yeah.
this a win-win situation for
Yeah.
us both? Yeah. I love
Yeah.
that.
No, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I'm curious, so for what other principles would you have? Because I'm like, all right, so we've got this, we've kind of done our research. We've first done our reflection, thought about what's
Mhm.
important to us. We've done some research. We've seen like, what can we find online about the way that this other person presents themselves, or what they're up to in the world. And then we've asked, and it seems like also part of what you're doing is when you like reading between the lines. So we're like looking at like nonverbal cues, maybe. So what's the pace of communication, or maybe even body language when we're communicating, openness, leaning in. But a lot of times people will have control of their their faces or whatever. But are there any other clues that we can be on the lookout for what's important to people before we move on to the to next principles?
Other clues on what's important to people. You want to do your research. For example, let's say you find out that you have a mutual friend on LinkedIn with this potential customer or vendor. Just hop on a call with that friend, or send them a quick text or DM, and you can ask the friend about what's important to them. And in job negotiations, this has been so helpful to me. I get an insight into, my hiring managers' mindset and what they care about. That's actually, it's so priceless to learn from someone who knows them. So you can do that as a business owner as well. What's important to people, finding out from people who know them. Yeah, so doing a very thorough research, even in very creative ways. That's what comes to mind. Yeah.
I love that. That is such an interesting. I almost think about even if you were wanting to be friends with someone, like reaching out to a friend that you have in common and being like, "Hey, what's this person like? Like, what are you like?" If I knew that somebody did that about me, I would feel really flattered that somebody had like done that and
Yeah.
had gone to the trouble to explore that. I think that's really
Yes.
cool. What
And it
other
shows you're
mindsets?
very
Oh,
prepared. Sorry to
yeah.
interrupt you. It shows you're very prepared, right? So, and you can mention, I think there are certain industries that want you to do that research and really appreciate the little things, like knowing what your favorite food is. And when you have a business dinner, they take you to a restaurant that they know you would like, and it has your favorite food. And all that small touch of things really matters sometimes in locking in a deal.
I love that. It's really cool. I think that's really useful for people to think about. Like, what are those little things,
Mhm.
and what are the details that make the difference?
Yeah.
What other mindsets do you think go into being the kind of person who enters into negotiations where you win negotiations? And again, we're talking win-win situations. We've already talked
Mhm.
about that mindset. But what are the other mindsets that you think are useful for people to kind of maybe either prepare for themselves or to take a stand for in themselves when they're doing negotiations?
Yeah, I shared the being very collaborative, wanting to show or showing excitement about whatever the opportunity is. If it's a job, about the job, the company, the hiring manager, the team, the product. Um, Making sure to remember that everything is a negotiation and you're kind of being interviewed in every interaction. So there are people who, um, they might interact differently with people at different roles in the company, and they're only nice to the hiring manager. Like, you don't want to do that. You want to be nice to everyone, right? So, and you want to show excitement in every interaction just to remind them that you really want to make this work and you're on the same team. Another
Mm.
thing to like, another mindset is, so while I've shown the sort of the softer side of things, you also want to sort of preserve your inner power. So not in not in a very woo-woo way, but basically there are ways to handle certain negotiations, and I'll give you an example. So let's say you're negotiating with a potential customer and they ask you to lower your price. So you could just say yes, but it is a bit of a sort of a weak position to come in and just say yes up front. What is a much better, like, preserving your power approach is, hey, like, I'm happy to offer you a family and friends discount, as just out of the generosity of my heart, not out of desperation, right? So you're like, I'm bringing you into my inner circle. I want to make this work. I'll give you a discount, instead of just saying yes to the price. Because you may have heard of this concept of, I'm trying to remember the exact term, but it's like a winner's curse, which is if you win right away, sometimes you kind of regret winning because you feel like, oh, they said yes right away. I feel like I left money on the
Oh
table.
man,
Like, why was,
yeah.
yeah, why was this win so easy, right? So you also want them to feel like they earned the thing they got. And so if you position it as like, sure, I'm happy to give you a discount. I'll give you my friends and family discount. And this is just for you, and because I care about making this deal happen. So things like that.
Yeah,
Um, yeah,
I love that. This idea of like wanting them to have feel like they have the feeling that they earned whatever it was that they
yeah,
got, which is so interesting because I think this gets into some of the more subtle psychological principles of negotiation. Because like, what is value really? At
mm,
the end of the day, value is
mm,
like what we think value is. You know
yeah,
what I mean? Like whether it could be the exact same price, the exact same deal, literally the whole same structure of the deal, but if you feel at the end of it like it was too easy or it wasn't like it wasn't hard and challenging enough for you to get to it, you might value that deal less than
yeah,
the same exact deal where you had to work a little harder for it. And I
yeah,
think that's like a
exactly.
really interesting just like mindset to be aware of, to become aware of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. You want to be in the right headspace when you're negotiating. But like you said earlier, that you go into negotiations with, I'm going to make this a win-win. That is such a good place to start from, and you're already set for success if you come in through that mindset.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm curious because you kind of mentioned your own personal power. So I'm interested in hearing like how do you think about balancing maybe is one way of looking at it, but balancing, you know, making a win-win with also preserving your own power. How do you think about like what kinds of thoughts do we have, or how do we as the individual negotiator think about kind of bridging the gap between, you know, and some people might say like being a pushover and being a hard ass, you know what I mean? Like that's one way of thinking about it, but really being like leaving money on the table or leaving value on the table
Hmm.
versus to kind of taking a stand for what's important. How do you think about navigating that
Yeah,
distinction? Does that
the way
question make sense?
I think it does. Let me see if I can answer it.
Okay, cool.
So the way I think about it is that's why being very crystal clear on what your priorities are is so important, because let's say your non-negotiable is in a job negotiation, it could be you want to work remotely, fully remotely, and this company is not fully remote. That's a non-negotiable. And so once you get that, you already got a win, and so you can give a little bit as well. So that's how I think about it. Am I getting the things that are super important to me, especially the non-negotiables? If I'm getting them, I want to be generous too and offer something. Hey, I can start earlier, or I don't know, whatever makes sense. I'll deliver this project at 2 weeks earlier than we discussed. So things like that. I do think about like what my priorities are, and am I getting those needs met, which is how you think about all negotiations.
Love it. I love that. So let's switch gears a little bit here because you kind of mentioned desperation was something
Mhm.
like how do we enter into negotiation free from desperation? Like you know I'm gonna give you this as a friends and family rather than from coming from a place of like I need this deal. What other than desperation? What do you think tends to get in the way of people effectively negotiating for things in the world? Like what kinds of mindsets or challenges or limiting thoughts or beliefs might block people from creating effective win-win situations?
Okay, so one, I'm so glad you asked this, because the all the questions you're asking are kind of in the flow of how I think about things. So um, another thing to think about is how comfortable you are with silence. So a lot of people do not use silence well, or they don't use it at all. So that's another strategy to think about. Like, be very comfortable with a pause, whether you are live with someone and you're negotiating. You can The one trick is to think to yourself, maybe count to seven. So okay, I'm just gonna they make you an offer that's a bit aggressive. You don't know what to say, you don't want to say yes, it's too aggressive. What do? Be a little comfortable with a pause. Count to seven in your head. Just maybe nod, smile. You're thinking, count to seven, and then see what happens. Sometimes it's very interesting. Sometimes the other party will dial it back. This is actually very common. You would be surprised. And in emails or in other non synchronized communication, maybe you don't have to respond to that email today. It came today. You don't have to respond by end of day. Let it sit a bit. Silence and pausing are so powerful, especially there are many cultures that are not comfortable with it. I had to learn to practice it. I wasn't naturally comfortable with it, but just knowing how powerful it is and having seen it in action, that wow, when I pause, the other party usually like backtracks on their bad offer. It's very interesting. The other thing is getting comfortable with not having an answer on the spot. We think we need to answer on the spot, and not only do we think that, but many times we're pressured to. In job negotiations, this is very common. The recruiter will be like, "Hey, so I have an offer. We would love to have you join. Here's my offer. What do you think of this number?" And a lot of people feel this, social pressure to respond on the spot. get comfortable with saying, thank you for the offer. Let me think about that and get back to you as soon as I can. And some people might think that shows you don't have an answer or you don't have your priorities straight. That's not true at all. That comes across as you being okay with stepping away a bit and taking the time to think. I think it actually projects even more confidence and business acumen.
Yeah, it's like expressing that you have a center that you're going to check in with, right? Like
Yeah,
that you care about what your priorities are, and I'm going to go investigate to see how that feels for me.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really interesting too because there's another like psychological principle where this and what silence kind of does is when they make an offer and you're silent, then they're going to map on to you whatever thoughts and feelings they're going to project onto you, whatever thoughts and feelings they would have about that that
Yes.
offer in that silence. And so sometimes that's why they'll backtrack or whatever,
Yes.
is because they're like, well, actually, I wouldn't want that, that
Yes.
deal. And I was trying to get away with
Or
something, but
yeah, or that was an aggressive deal. Yeah, like I'm being aggressive. Yeah.
yeah.
Um yeah. I wanted to add another important principle, which is persistence. You want to um come back again and again. It's totally okay to do that. And actually, I have a lot of clients, or even, excuse me, I have a lot of clients or even people in my audience, social media and all that I have mentioned that one way to know when your job negotiations have reached the end is when the company says, "Hey, this is our best and final offer. Like we really like you, but we're prepared to lose you." And people normally generally think maybe you can negotiate once or twice. No, you actually can negotiate like many, many more times until you hear words along those lines. And I've heard this feedback, like I said, from people who consume my content. Like, wow, I negotiated multiple times and I finally heard those words. It was so helpful because it allowed me to get a lot more from the offer than if I had just ended it after one or two asks.
I love
So
that. This is our best
persistence
and
is
final
key.
offer.
Yeah,
this is
yeah,
this is the bottom line. Look, I would love to do more, but we're not gonna.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, really cool. I want to. I think any conversation about negotiations would be remiss to not talk about this. I'm interested in how do we set an initial price? How do you think about coming in
Mm,
with your initial offer, or like if you're depending on no matter which side of the offer
yeah.
your offer table you're on, how do you think about what's that first offer? Where do we come in with our initial price point? How do you figure that out? How do you decide?
Yeah, that's a very important question and thing to think about. So, in the context of job negotiations, as a job applicant, you actually never, with a small asterisk, very tiny asterisk, you never want to give a number or a range. That's because, and I can talk about the asterisks and the very rare exceptions, but that's because the chances are that you are not a compensation expert and you don't have enough market data to know what a role is paid, what it should be paid or what's being paid in the market right now. The other piece of it is that you most likely don't know all the what's happening internally for a company. So maybe, like I said earlier, they might want to launch a product as soon as possible, so they need more hands on deck, or they want to impress an investor. They got a new talented person, which is you, and people will be impressed, or the team is burning out and people might quit if we don't get more help on that team. So all these reasons means that there's no magical number that you can or like there's no magical number out there that you can go and research and you're like, oh, this is what they will pay me. There are some numbers, of course. There's market data, aggregated data, but there's also the internal pressures of a company. And so the asterisk, like I said, is like if you're a compensation professional or you have access to this very expensive aggregated market data, which only companies typically have access to, and I, but you actually want the company to say the first number. In negotiation philosophy, that first number is called anchoring. So saying the first number is anchoring, which means it does influence. the rest of the conversation. However, in the job setting, it's okay to push back multiple times, and so that first number will not necessarily anchor you to your last final offer.
Yeah. So and so what I'm hearing, and I'm curious to apply this to other settings than the
Hmm.
salary
Yeah.
negotiation in this case, because I think it's really interesting what goes into those numbers. So
Hmm.
because we are going to have that anchoring, and just to for if you're not familiar with what anchoring is, it's like whatever that first price point is, that's what you're going to compare all other price points
Hmm.
to, like relative to. Robert Cialdini has this example that I think is hilarious in this book, where he talks about, sometimes when you're flying, they'll want to bump you to the next flight, and so they'll
Hmm.
offer you something to do that. And a guy came on and he was like making a joke, and he said, "We're going to offer the next person $1 million to do that thing," and he was just joking. But then, like, what they actually wound up having to pay to get somebody to
Yeah.
bump their flight was so much higher than it usually is, because he had
Yeah.
anchored them in at $1 million, which is an absurd amount, right?
Yeah.
And so what we're talking about is like setting that initial price point and having that be kind of the point that everybody else is hanging on to for the rest of the negotiation. So how do we think about, so you're saying like in salary negotiations, it's probably a good idea to let the
Yeah.
company say that
Yeah.
first number to create that anchor point. But what about in business to business negotiations,
Hmm.
or in other situations where we would be negotiating?
Yeah, so just to close the loop on the salary negotiations, the anchoring principle doesn't apply necessarily there because of, like, the company has market data and they have their own internal pressures. And so, they most likely will give you a number that is within the range of what makes sense. And then you can negotiate up from there. But in terms of business negotiations and coming up with that price, I have a business myself, and so I had to answer this question for myself, like what do I charge people, right? So if it's a service, I highly recommend experimenting. I've done this myself, and just experiment different numbers if you don't already have a price in mind, and see what lands with people. You will need to do a lot of experimentation, and you can also play with, like I said, discounts, or like, oh, we have holiday discounts or family and friends discounts or referral codes or affiliate marketing and things like that, and which tells you roughly what price point people are comfortable with. And remember to also experiment with some a little higher numbers that might feel a little ridiculous, just because if it works, then now you're at that level. So if let's say you're used to charging, I'm gonna make this up, like $500 an hour, and some people take it and some people don't. You're playing with the discounts. Oh, 400, 400 is more people are saying yes to that. And then don't shy away from trying like $900 an hour. Maybe some people will buy it. Maybe you will capture an entirely other audience that wants to pay for very high quality, which is, people correlate high price with high quality of a service. So that is kind of my strategy around pricing. And yeah.
I love that. I love the idea to experiment. I'd be curious how if you have any thoughts on how to like capture that data, or if there are any rules of thumb, like how many yeses would you want before you decided that that was a solid price point, or are there other pieces of data that would go into that consideration of whether or not, when you're experimenting, whether you know it
Yeah.
worked, so to speak? Any thoughts on that?
It's tough for me to say without knowing the specific business, and the pricing model. Of course, you want to take into account your costs. Like, is there an entire team you need to feed? Things like that, or a large family or something like that. So, yeah, it's hard
And that
for
would
me
go
to
back
give.
to finding your
Yeah,
center and your what's your priorities, right?
exactly.
Like, do we have a team and all that other stuff? Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
I just wanted to see if there was a if there was an answer to that. I don't have an answer to that either. I think it's a very case by case basis.
Mhm.
Cool. This is awesome, Gerta. This is an amazing conversation. I'm curious. Do you have any final thoughts or any final principles that we didn't cover, maybe that you think are really useful for people to kind of hold on to as they go into their negotiations in the world?
Yeah, I have a few others. The more kind of surprising one would be therapy,
Okay.
because one thing that comes up in negotiations is people could be extreme people pleasers, and as a negotiation consultant, I cannot extract that out of you. I can give you all the coaching and consulting possible, but if you're such an extreme people pleaser that you immediately say yes to everything, it will take a lot of practice, which is okay, and we should all practice to get better in certain skills. But also, you want to also dig deeper with a professional on like how to be comfortable negotiating, be comfortable with silence, with disappointing people in your mind. Like, uh, maybe they're not disappointed. That's just how negotiations go. They'll say no 5 times. It's okay. So that is one of the more, I guess, non-common negotiation advice that I give. Other things are things like humanizing yourself. So especially when in a business negotiation, less in a job negotiation. But you want to talk about maybe your personal life a little bit, and really humanize yourself. Like if you have kids, mention the kids or the elderly that you're maybe taking care of or have in your life. Like those things work. And business is business, but sometimes it's personal, especially if you're a business owner. Like that is very personal. Another thing is it okay if I throw a
Yeah, you're
few
doing
more
great.
tips? Okay.
Yeah, go. This is amazing. Yeah.
Okay. So one of the mindset that has clicked with a lot of people that I've noticed is thinking of negotiations as a game, and especially as a card game. So you don't win a card game if you show your hand, right? So in general, you don't want to show your hand unless it helps. So in job negotiations, you don't want to share what other companies you're applying to, who you're talking to, what size they are, what industry. But you do want to share if you have a job offer. You say, hey, I have another offer. That makes you seem desirable in the market. So similarly for your own business, like of course you in general, you don't want to share information that could be potentially hurt you in the negotiation. Some Sorry, were
So
you about to say something?
don't show your hand,
Don't show your
and
hand.
that's another principle. So we had like the opposite of desperation, maybe even is like desirability. And so if we
Mm-hmm.
any ways
Yes.
that we can show desirability is going to be useful because it's going to help. It's going to again increase the perception of value, which is really important.
Yes, exactly. One thing I want to caution though is I have a couple clients who, to show desirability, they went above and beyond in what they shared, and that could hurt you. So keep in mind, like, could this information hurt me? So one subtle way in which someone I know gave away her leverage without even knowing that she was giving it away was she was negotiating with a top tech company, one of the FANGs, or Meng as they're called now, and they asked her, do you have another offer? She's like, yes, I have another offer from an AI company. So she was so proud to share that. But actually, she hurt herself. Like she hurt her chances of succeeding in this negotiation by giving that away, because by saying I have an offer from an AI company, she actually signaled that that company is not a Meng. It's
Right.
actually mid-size or startup. Um, because we don't refer to Apple, Meta, Amazon, and Google as AI companies. And so that signaled to the company that she has an offer from a smaller size company, which means their offer, the company she was negotiating with, is the best one that she has, and so they wouldn't give her more money. So be careful how you reveal the information you reveal.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Um, cool. Okay, so think of it as a card game. Humanize yourself. Be
Yes.
careful of people pleasing. That's another thing that's going to get in the way. Is any kind
Yes.
of like people pleasing tendencies. Any other final thoughts on things that might get in your way as you're
Yeah.
negotiating? So we talked about desperation. We talked about people pleasing. Anything else that you know of? The big ones.
Might get in the way. How about let me share more about like things that could help you. So what things
Okay.
you can do is like you can share your research. So if you're negotiating again and again and they're not budging at all, let's say it's a customer and they're like, I can't do this price at all, and you're like, okay, let me walk you through my research, right? So um other business owners like myself, they typically charge this much, but they also are offering ABC. I also offer XYZ. And so you're walking through the value that you add, maybe your cost to humanize yourself further. What your competitors, where else would they go? You have the best offer. So that can actually help them like, oh, okay, I can sort of hear your thinking, and they will probably agree with you, or at least appreciate you sharing your research. Um, and
So
then
logic,
yeah, go ahead.
share your
Yeah.
logic and how you're reasoning about it.
Yeah, your logic or your research. So it depends which side of the negotiation you are. But if you're a business owner, you can say, "Hey, like other," so I'm a negotiations consultant. Hey, other negotiation consultants are not offering this sweet deal that I offer, which is a success fee only, versus they offer flat fee as well, and you have to pay no matter what, even if you don't succeed. So things like that. And they're like, "Oh, okay, that's good to know what the research out there is." Um,
Cool.
yeah.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? It seemed like you might have had a couple more.
One more
Okay,
is
great.
to have some mantras in mind. Negotiations, like I said, it's very like it's a very tense situation in general. Like people are very nervous, especially if they're not comfortable with it. Emotions are high, and you might do or say things you didn't want to do or say. So some mantras to have in mind could be, I will not say yes or no to an offer on a call. And you're on this call, whoever it is pressuring you a lot. So in job search could be the recruiter is pressuring you. What do you think of our offer? Like, do you accept? Do you like this? Or maybe a vendor is like, I offer this, I charge this much. Like, will you take it? You can keep in mind, or you can even have it written in front of you, like something like, I will not say yes or no on the spot. And you can repeat it. I will not say yes or no on the spot. And that might help you like remember how to navigate a situation where the emotions are very high.
Awesome. Like practice a thought, and then because
Yeah,
you could actually say that. Hey, I mean, just to be super clear, I'm not going to say yes or no on this call because that's just like not how I operate.
right.
It's a boundary of mine or whatever,
Yeah,
right?
you can totally say it, but I think in general negotiations you want to sound more natural. So you like yeah, like I have some clients who are like, oh, I'll just tell the recruiter, I will not give you a number. That feels a little combative, and that's not how we talk to people we're collaborating with. So if you have it in mind, I will not give them a number, but I will be very nice to them. You can be like, oh yeah, let me get back to you on that. Um, so you can still be nice and professional, but in your mind you also have your boundaries set clear, that I will not give a number, I will not say yes or no on the spot.
Okay, so you're saying these mantras are for your internal
For
use, not
yourself,
necessarily your
yes,
expression. Okay,
exactly.
okay, gotcha.
Yes, for yourself, yes.
Awesome. This has been so great, Gerta. I think we could talk about this a lot. I think there's like so many different branching aspects of this that we could talk about, but this has been really helpful. I think this is going to really give some principles to people of how to negotiate, how to humanize themselves, how to experiment, how to think about what techniques to use, and maybe what parts to avoid in
Mhm.
negotiations. This has been really helpful. If people want to get a hold of you, you said you've got a resource to share with people. But if people want to get a hold of you, they want some help with negotiations of a business to business style negotiation or a salary negotiation or something like that. How would they get a hold of you? Where would you like them to go?
My website is the best place to go. It's yournegotiations.com. So plural, yournegotiations.com. I got lucky with that URL.
Nice, nice.
And then, yeah, you can follow me on IG, Twitter, LinkedIn, all of that. But once you go there, you'll find all my other resources there. And I have some
Awesome.
free resources as well.
Great, I love it, and this has been. I really think this is the kind of thing that's so valuable. If you're weak in negotiations, you're not thinking about them in these terms, it can really get in the way of a lot of successes in life. We didn't even talk about any of the other areas where you might negotiate, other than like business to business and sales. But I mean, there's opportunities for negotiation
Maybe we need
everywhere.
a part two, Ben.
Yeah, totally. Let's do that. We'll get that on the books. But thank you so much for taking the time, and for all you listening out there. Live your freedom, love your life.